Sensual Secrets. Welcome to our channel, where we flirt with the mind and bring your deepest desires to life through stories. Today we have a tantalizing story about a man that came through the mirror to reveal Isabella's sensual secrets. Can she resist his temptations or release herself to her desires? Please remember to subscribe if you enjoy the story. As the first light of dawn streamed into the room, painting everything in soft gold, Isabella stirred. The stranger's chest, smooth and firm beneath her cheek, rose and fell with his steady breathing. His hand rested lazily on her back, tracing delicate circles on her skin. She felt a sense of contentment she hadn't known was possible, a feeling of being seen, of being understood. And yet the questions swirled in her mind, refusing to fade away with the dawn. Who was this man who had come to her through the mirror? How had he known her so intimately, known the desires she had hidden even from herself? She shifted slightly, her eyes traveling over his features. His face was relaxed in sleep, but there was a certain mystery in his features, a darkness that lingered even in the light of day. His hair was tousled, his lips parted just enough to reveal a slight smirk, as if he had known all along what would happen between them. But still, he felt like a phantom, like someone who could disappear at any moment. Unable to resist the pull of curiosity, Isabella gently slid out of the bed. The cool air of the room kissed her bare skin, a reminder of the intensity of the night before. She glanced back at the stranger, who remained still in his slumber, and made her way toward the large mirror through which she had stepped into this world. The mirror shimmered with an ethereal light, still humming with the same energy that had drawn her in. As she stood before it, her reflection flickered for a moment, showing not the disheveled woman she now was, but the composed, elegant Isabella who had first gazed into its surface. The sight sent a chill down her spine. "What are you?" she whispered, her fingers once again brushing the glass. Before she could contemplate the answer, a soft, velvety voice interrupted her thoughts. "Leaving so soon?" Isabella spun around to see the stranger standing behind her, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of amusement and something deeper, more dangerous. He had wrapped a silk sheet loosely around his waist, but the raw power of his body was still evident, as was the magnetic pull he seemed to have over her. Isabella began, but her words faltered under the intensity of his gaze. "You've uncovered the secrets you sought, Isabella," he continued, his voice as smooth as honey. He took a step closer, his presence filling the room once more. "But there is more to this than just what happened last night." Her pulse quickened again, though this time it wasn't just desire that surged through her veins, it was unease. She took a step back, her hand brushing the surface of the mirror as if it could somehow protect her from the truth that was slowly dawning on her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man's smirk widened, and he stepped closer until there was no space between them. He reached out, his hand cupping her chin gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. They burned with an otherworldly fire, and in that moment, she knew he wasn't just any man. He was something more, something far beyond her understanding. "You are part of this world now," he said softly, his thumb brushing over her lower lip in a way that sent shivers down her spine. "You unlocked the mirror. You crossed over. There is no going back." Isabella's heart pounded in her chest as his words sank in. The mirror, the strange pull she had felt. The way her deepest desires had been laid bare. She had been so caught up in the intensity of the moment, so lost in the pleasure he had given her that she hadn't realized the cost of what she had done. "I don't belong here," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to go back." His hand tightened ever so slightly on her chin, his eyes darkening with a hint of something she couldn't quite place. Possessiveness, perhaps. Or was it fear? "You belong here more than you realize," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "This world is your true reflection, Isabella. It shows you who you really are, not who you pretend to be." She shook her head, trying to pull away, but his grip held firm. "You cannot deny it," he said, his lips brushing her ear as he leaned in closer. "You felt it last night. The freedom, the pleasure, the power. This is who you were meant to be." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. There was truth in his words, a truth that frightened her. She had felt free last night, unburdened by the expectations and restraints of her life. She had given in to her desires, her passions, without guilt or shame, and it had been intoxicating. But at what cost? "I can't stay here," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her decision. "I can't." The man's eyes flickered with something. Disappointment, perhaps, or was it something darker? For a moment, the room seemed to darken, the air growing heavier, as if the very walls were closing in around them. "You can leave," he said, his voice now tinged with a cold edge. "But know this, Isabella, once you cross back, you will never be the same. The mirror will always call to you, and the secrets you've uncovered will haunt you." She swallowed hard, her mind racing. Could she really walk away from this? From him? From the part of herself she had finally come to understand? But she had no choice. She had a life, a world, waiting for her on the other side of the mirror. A life she had worked so hard to build. She couldn't give it all up for a world of shadows and whispers, no matter how tempting it was. Without another word, she turned back to the mirror, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She reached out, her hand trembling as it made contact with the glass. The mirror shimmered, its surface rippling like water, and as she stepped forward, the world around her dissolved into mist, leaving only the echo of the man's voice behind her. "You'll be back, Isabella. You can't resist the secrets forever." The words lingered in her mind as she was pulled back through the portal, back to the world she had known. But even as she emerged into the safety of her own room, the soft light of morning illuminating her once more, she knew the stranger was right. The mirror's secrets would always be there, waiting for her, and no matter how hard she tried to forget, they would never truly let her go. As Isabella emerged from the shimmering portal, the world around her snapped back into the familiar contours of her bedroom. The soft rays of morning light filtered through the curtains, painting the room in a gentle glow. Her bed, once a place of comfort, now felt strange, as if it belonged to another life. Her skin still tingled with the memory of the stranger's touch, and her heart beat heavily in her chest, the echo of his voice whispering in her mind. "You'll be back, Isabella. You can't resist the secrets forever." Shaking her head, she stepped away from the mirror, her bare feet padding across the cool wooden floor. Everything was as it had been before. Her wardrobe, the polished vanity, the silk sheets. But somehow it all felt distant, like a fading memory. She sat down on the edge of her bed, pulling the robe draped over a nearby chair tightly around herself, trying to shake the lingering sensation of the stranger's hands on her body. The room felt too quiet, too empty after the intoxicating presence of the man she had left behind. But he wasn't just a man, was he? He had spoken of the mirror, of her reflection, as if it were more than just glass and silver, as if it were a doorway to something greater, and far more dangerous. A world where her desires weren't just whispers in the dark, but realities waiting to be fulfilled. Isabella's gaze drifted back to the mirror. Its surface now looked ordinary, reflecting only the room behind her. Yet she knew better. She had seen what lay on the other side, felt it, lived it. A shiver coursed through her, not from the cold, but from the memory of what had happened there, the secrets she had uncovered, the part of herself she had unlocked. "Who are you, really?" she asked herself, her thoughts swirling. Before last night, she had thought she knew. A woman of grace and restraint, someone who lived her life with dignity. But the reflection she had seen in that other world, the woman who had given in to passion, to freedom, to the touch of a stranger, was not the same Isabella she had always believed herself to be. Could it be that the reflection was the real her? The thought unsettled her, twisting in her stomach like a knot of uncertainty. The day passed in a blur. She went through the motions, meetings, errands, the quiet responsibilities of her life. But her mind kept drifting back to the mirror, and to the man who had promised her a world of forbidden pleasure. The memory of his lips on her skin, his hands tracing the contours of her body, was too fresh, too vivid to ignore. By evening, Isabella could no longer deny it. The pull of the mirror had become impossible to resist. She found herself standing before it once more, her heart pounding in her chest, her fingers trembling as they hovered above the surface. The voice from the night before echoed in her mind, "The mirror will always call to you, and the secrets you've uncovered will haunt you." But was it just the mirror, or was it something deeper? a part of her that longed to break free from the confines of her carefully crafted life, the part of her that wanted to know what lay beyond the reflection. Slowly, she pressed her palm to the glass. The surface rippled like liquid once again, and Isabella felt the familiar pull, the seductive energy that beckoned her to step through. But this time she hesitated. Was she truly ready to cross that threshold again, to face the man who had unlocked her most hidden desires? And then, as if sensing her doubt, the voice returned. Isabella. It was soft, almost a whisper, but it sent a shock of recognition through her. It was him, the stranger from the other side. He was waiting for her. You don't have to fight it, the voice continued. You belong here, with me. Her breath caught in her throat. The pull of his voice was undeniable, and despite her fear, her body responded to it. The memory of their night together, the passion, the pleasure, flooded her senses, clouding her thoughts. With a deep breath, Isabella made her choice. She stepped forward, allowing herself to be drawn back into the mirror's shimmering depths. This time, the transition was smoother, almost seamless, as if the mirror was welcoming her back into its world. And when she opened her eyes, she was no longer in her bedroom. The room she found herself in was different from the one before. It was darker, more intimate, the air thick with the scent of incense, and something else, something primal. Velvet drapes lined the walls, and a fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced along the walls. And there he was, standing at the edge of the room, watching her with those same burning eyes. "Welcome back," he said, his voice low and full of promise. Isabella's breath hitched as he approached her, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. There was a heat between them, a tension that crackled in the air, and she couldn't look away from him. "I knew you would return," he murmured, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. His touch was as electrifying as before, sending a jolt of pleasure through her body. "You can't deny what you are, Isabella. This world, my world, is where you truly belong." She swallowed hard, her mind racing. His words resonated with something deep inside her, something she had tried to ignore since the moment she had first stepped through the mirror. The freedom, the power she had felt in this world, it was intoxicating. It made her feel alive in a way that her old life never had. But there was still a part of her that resisted, a part that clung to the life she had built on the other side of the mirror. Could she really give it all up? Could she stay here, in this shadowy, seductive world, with a man she barely knew, but who made her feel things she had never imagined possible? "I don't know what I want," she whispered, her voice trembling. The man's eyes softened slightly, and for a moment she thought she saw something more in his gaze, compassion, understanding. But it was fleeting, replaced once more by the smoldering intensity that had drawn her in from the beginning. "You do know," he said, his lips brushing against hers, barely a whisper of a kiss. "You're just afraid to admit it." And in that moment, Isabella realized that he was right. She did know what she wanted. She had known from the moment she had first touched the mirror. This world, his world, held the secrets she had always longed to uncover. It was a place where she could be free, where she could give in to her desires without shame or guilt. With a trembling breath, she closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was both fierce and tender, full of the passion that had been building between them since the night they first met. And as their bodies pressed together, Isabella knew there was no turning back. The kiss deepened, drawing Isabella into the heart of a storm she couldn't escape. Her hands slid up his chest, feeling the hard planes of muscle beneath the silk of his shirt. His hands moved down her back, possessive, claiming her in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. Every touch sent a shock of pleasure through her, a reminder that in this world, her desires weren't just fantasies, they were real, tangible, and utterly irresistible. She broke the kiss for a moment, gasping for breath, her eyes searching his face for any hint of doubt. But the man before her, the stranger who had drawn her into this world of shadows and secrets, held no hesitation in his gaze. His smoldering eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You feel it, don't you?" he whispered, his lips brushing against her ear as his hands traced the curve of her waist. "The pull of this place. The pull of us." Isabella swallowed hard, her heart racing in her chest. She did feel it. Every fiber of her being was screaming to stay, to surrender to the power of this connection between them. But there was a lingering voice in the back of her mind, a small whisper of reason that reminded her of the life she had left behind. The life where everything was neat and controlled, where she had carved out a path for herself through careful choices and discipline. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling as she pulled away slightly, needing space to think. "Why me? Why did you bring me here?" The man's expression softened, his hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb brushing lightly across her cheek. His touch, though gentle, held an underlying power that sent a shiver through her. "Because you're not like the others," he said softly, his eyes searching hers. "You're different, Isabella. I saw it in you the moment you gazed into the mirror. You don't just want control. You want freedom. You want to feel." Her breath caught in her throat. His words struck a chord deep within her, one she hadn't been ready to acknowledge until now. She had spent so much of her life chasing control, chasing the perfect image, but it had left her feeling hollow. And now, here was this man, this stranger, who knew her in ways she had never allowed anyone else to, offering her the chance to break free from the chains she had wrapped around herself. But at what cost? "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her hand resting on his chest. "I need to know the truth." He held her gaze for a long moment, his eyes darkening as if he were weighing something heavy in his mind. Then, slowly, he let out a breath and stepped back, breaking their connection. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension, the energy in the room shifting as he finally spoke. "My name is Kaylin," he said, his voice low but firm. "I am the keeper of the mirror, the one who guards the secrets it holds, and you, Isabella, are the one it has chosen." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Isabella's mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. The mirror wasn't just a reflection, it was a gateway, a portal to something far greater, far more powerful than she had ever imagined. And Seelan? He was its guardian, but why had it chosen her? "Chosen me for what?" she asked, her voice shaking as she tried to process everything. Kaylin stepped closer again, his hand reaching out to take hers. His grip was warm, strong, grounding her in the midst of the storm raging in her mind. "You have a gift, Isabella," he said softly. "A gift that few possess. You can see beyond the surface, beyond the reflection. The mirror responds to your desires because it knows you are capable of unlocking the truth hidden within it." She shook her head, confusion and fear clouding her thoughts. "But I don't understand. What does that mean? What truth?" Kaylin's gaze darkened, and for the first time, Isabella saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "There is a world beyond this one," he said quietly. "A world where desires shape reality. The mirror is the key to that world. But it is also a prison, a place where the line between pleasure and pain, between power and submission is blurred. You have the power to control it, to command it, but you must be willing to surrender to it as well." Her heart pounded in her chest as his words sunk in. This world, this realm of sensuality and shadows, was far more dangerous than she had realized, and she was at the center of it. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear and desire. "I didn't want any of this." Kaylin's hand tightened around hers, his eyes locking onto hers with a fierce intensity. "But you need it," he said, his voice low and commanding. "You need to feel alive, to break free from the cage you've built for yourself. The mirror called to you because it knows what you truly desire, even if you don't." Isabella's mind spun, torn between the life she had left behind and the intoxicating world that now beckoned her. She felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice, about to fall into the unknown. And then, before she could stop herself, she asked the question that had been burning in the back of her mind. "What happens if I stay?" Kaylin's eyes darkened, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing, and the air in the room seemed to grow heavier, charged with anticipation. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you stay, you will become a part of this world," he said. "You will learn its secrets, its pleasures, its dangers. You will experience everything you've ever craved, and more. But there will be no turning back. Once you choose this path, you are bound to it." A shiver ran down Isabella's spine. The weight of his words hung in the air, pressing down on her like a heavy cloak. She knew, deep down, that this was the moment of truth. The moment where she had to decide whether to return to the life she had always known or to step fully into the unknown, to embrace the desires she had long kept hidden. She looked into Kalen's eyes, seeing the darkness and the fire that burned within him, and felt the pull of the mirror once more. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Kalen's hand slid to the back of her neck, pulling her closer, his lips hovering just above hers. His breath was warm against her skin, sending a shiver of anticipation down her spine. "You are ready, Isabella," he whispered, his voice full of certainty. "You've been ready your entire life." And with that, he closed the distance between them, capturing her lips in a kiss that was both a promise and a challenge, a kiss that held the weight of the choice she was about to make. And as Isabella's body responded to his touch, as the fire ignited between them once more, she knew that the choice had already been made. She was never going back. Isabella melted into Kalen's kiss, the fire between them burning hotter than ever before. His hands explored her body with the same hunger she had felt the first time they met. But this time, there was no hesitation, no holding back. She gave herself to him completely, her body arching toward his, craving more of the sensation only he could give. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the velvet-draped bed at the center of the room. As he laid her down, his gaze devoured her, full of desire and reverence. Slowly, deliberately, he peeled away the layers of her clothing, his hands tracing her skin as if committing every curve to memory. Each touch sent waves of pleasure rippling through her, and she gasped softly as he kissed a path down her neck, his lips lingering at the sensitive spot just beneath her ear. "Tell me what you want," he whispered, his voice rough with need. Isabella's breath came in shallow gasps, her mind lost in the whirlwind of sensation. She had never felt so alive, so free. All the walls she had built around herself had crumbled, leaving nothing but the raw, burning desire that consumed her. "I want you," she breathed, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. "I want all of you." Kalen groaned in response, his lips crashing against hers as his hands roamed lower, teasing her, building her anticipation until every nerve in her body was on fire. The tension between them reached a breaking point as he finally joined with her, their bodies moving together in perfect rhythm. The world around them disappeared. There was only the two of them, lost in the overwhelming tide of passion, their hearts and bodies entwined as one. Every touch, every kiss, every breath they shared was an unspoken promise, a vow of pleasure and surrender. Isabella had never experienced anything like this, an all-consuming connection that threatened to tear her apart and rebuild her in the same breath. As their passion reached its crescendo, Isabella cried out, her body trembling beneath Kalen's as waves of pleasure washed over her, carrying her higher and higher until she felt like she was floating, weightless and free. Kalen followed, his own release hitting him with equal force, and for a moment, they were suspended in that perfect, blissful state, their hearts beating in sync. But as the intensity of the moment ebbed and they lay together in the afterglow, something shifted in the air. Isabella felt it first, a subtle change, like the room had grown colder. She opened her eyes to find Kalen staring down at her, his expression unreadable. "Kalen?" she whispered, confusion and unease creeping into her voice. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned closer, his lips brushing against her ear as he whispered, "There's one last secret you need to know, Isabella." Her heart skipped a beat, the weight of his words settling heavily over her. "What secret?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kalen pulled back slightly, his dark eyes locking onto hers, and for the first time, Isabella saw something in his gaze that sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't desire, it wasn't passion. It was something darker, something cold. "I wasn't sent to bring you to this world," he said softly. "I was sent to keep you here." Isabella's breath caught in her throat, her body freezing beneath him as the meaning of his words hit her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling with fear. Kalen's smile was small, almost sad. "You see, Isabella, the mirror doesn't just reflect desire. It reflects power. And in this world, power is everything. You were chosen not because of your desires, but because of your potential. You have the power to control this realm, to shape it, but only if you stay. Only if you surrender to it completely." Her mind raced, the pieces falling into place. The mirror, the seductive pull of the world, the way Celine had pushed her to stay, to embrace her desires. It had all been leading to this. "You're trying to trap me here," she whispered, horror dawning on her. "You never wanted to set me free." Kalen's eyes darkened, his expression hardening. "It's not a trap, Isabella. It's a choice. You can stay and become something greater than you ever imagined, or you can leave and lose everything you've gained here." Isabella's heart pounded in her chest as the weight of the decision pressed down on her. The passion, the pleasure, the freedom she had found in this world, it had all been real, but it had also been a lure, a temptation meant to bind her to this place forever. And if she stayed, she would never be able to return to her old life. She would be a prisoner of her own desires. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as she realized the depth of the betrayal. "I trusted you," she said, her voice shaking with anger and pain. Kalen's expression softened slightly, but there was no regret in his eyes. "I know," he said quietly, "and I meant every word. I care for you, Isabella, but this world, it requires sacrifices." She shook her head, her heart breaking. "I can't stay here. Not like this." For a moment, Kalen's grip on her tightened as if he wasn't going to let her go, but then slowly he released her, stepping back from the bed. His gaze never left hers, and the coldness in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine. "If you walk away now," he said softly, "you'll never be the same. The mirror's pull will haunt you for the rest of your life. You'll always wonder what could have been." Isabella sat up, pulling the sheets around her, her mind racing. She knew he was right. She would never be able to forget the taste of freedom, the power she had felt in this world. But she also knew that staying would cost her something far greater, her soul. With trembling hands, she stood, turning away from Kalen and the intoxicating allure of the mirror. As she stepped toward the portal, the air around her shimmered, the pull of the other world fading as she made her choice. But just as she was about to cross the threshold, Kalen's voice stopped her one last time. "You'll be back, Isabella," he said, his voice calm, confident. "No one can resist the secrets forever." She didn't look back. As Isabella stepped through the mirror and back into the familiar world of her bedroom, the portal closed behind her with a soft whisper. The room was still and quiet, but the weight of the choices she had made lingered in the air. But as she glanced at the mirror one last time, her heart sank. Because in her reflection, she didn't see herself. She saw Kalen standing just behind her, his dark eyes watching her with a knowing smile. And in that moment, she realized the truth. She had never really left.